Welcome to the Suicide Monk, and I am your host, and my name is Britton. Today we're going to be speaking with Michael Molthan. He is from M2 The Rock out of Dallas, Texas. He specializes in addiction, and incredible conversation ahead. We talk about his road to recovery, how he ended up in recovery, and being in prison and almost completing, taking his life a few times and being miraculously pulled back away from that, and then finding through another miracle upon miracle being released from prison when he was in there with murderers and gang members and stuff like that, and he's just a street kid having struggles. So it's a great conversation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this wealth of knowledge, especially in the addiction field and recovery, and how he takes people through that, and kind of what he's, what he faced in his own life. So you're going to hear from the other guy that works here in just a second, just for a little disclaimer. So with no further ado, let's get to it. I just wanted to remind everybody that before we start our conversation that we're not doctors and therapists. Some of the people that I do speak to are doctors and therapists, but we're here to share our experience, not necessarily give advice, but share those things that have worked for us and how we've transferred pain into passion and purpose. So that's one of the things I just wanted to let you know, that although there are professionals on here, I am not. I just happen to be very versed in the field of suicide, and suicide thought, but I don't know it all, and I don't know it all about suicide. So these experiences have taught me a lot over this course, and so I just want to let everybody know that, and remind you that this is a channel for information and learning, and maybe you can apply some of this to your life. So if you do find value in some of the conversations that you find on this channel, by all means, all links will be down below to support them or the Suicide Monk in the mission ahead. So thank you for joining us, and let's get to it. We'll see you on the good side. Peace. Yeah, so you have, is this a radio station that you have?
So I used to be on iHeartRadio. We can talk about that, drive home traffic for 2 years. And then I went to a TV studio, news station, and did the show there. I was doing it 5 days a week. I mean,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 5 days a week. And now we branched off, and then I started speaking, pivots started happening. And so now I do the show from here. And now we are in negotiations that the studio, they want me to come back and, that be the mothership of doing the show in this TV studio. So, I mean, we're literally in the middle of conversations as we speak. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. With iHeart?
No, this is called Real News Network.
Oh, okay.
Now we're on iHeart's, podcast.
Okay. Yeah.
We just got voted, just got the email 2 days ago. We're in the top 1% of self-improvement podcast.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so we're number 80 in the world right now. So under
congratulations.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. It's as you climb that a little bit, it's hard to stay humble in it too. So that's one, I'm my big prayer.
I remain small. I just remain small, and like Dr. Tony Evans says, don't start smelling yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's Michael Molthan. Is that right?
That's correct. Very good.
Okay. And you're from M2 Rock out of Dallas, Texas. And you do addiction, coaching, and various other things to help guys get out of that thing.
Yeah, we started that. I mean, so it's inspirational stories with inspirational guests. My main goal is to help people see life through God's perspective, and not the world or the cultures. So,
Okay.
looking back on that past trauma and all that stuff, I look back at it through a different perspective now. As opposed to, if I look at it through my perspective, it's resentment, and
Mm,
that's
yeah.
the number one. That is the number one cause of death that's killing the human race is holding on to resentments. It's not
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol. So we started that way. Then it's grown into, our tour is for 25 is everyone's an addict, you know,
Okay.
and then you can ask me, addiction. I'll define addiction and all that, but I'm a faith-based guy. I'm a strong believer in Christ. He came into my life. It was a burning bush white light experience, while incarcerated.
So you didn't
And
have previous
no, mm-mm,
religious background.
no, no,
Okay.
no, no. That's one
Interesting.
trauma I didn't have, religious trauma.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
actually really good because
Yeah.
it's easier to read for yourself and then unpack that for yourself
Yeah.
and find
Yeah. And
that God in the ebb and flow instead
right.
of picking that apart and
Mm-hmm.
trying to find the elephant beneath all the crap. So
Right.
it's but yeah, tell me about that. How did incarceration? You've let's go back a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, you I looked at some of your stuff, or I've been able to read some of it. We just spoke yesterday, so this is new. I'm excited to do this. What was your childhood like? What brought you to this place where you ended up getting incarcerated? Can we
Well,
go back a little bit?
my childhood was very confusing. I was, I was born on the wrong side of the tracks. I was raised on the wrong side of the tracks. I was raised in a very wealthy family. My dad and mom got married very young, and my dad was a workaholic. That's what defined him. I didn't have a relationship with my dad, and um, you know, in public, we appeared to be the great family. Behind closed doors, it was chaos. At a very young age, my mom was always taking me to psychiatrists and counselors, and say fix him, and psychiatrists started prescribing me medication at a very young age, and you know, one psychiatrist said, you know, he's not the problem, y'all are, and I'm not going to prescribe him anything because he's just he's off the charts smart, from an education standpoint, tested genius, whatever that means. Um, but, he needs a mom and a dad. He doesn't have attention deficit disorder, but he does because he's lacking attention. And also behind the scenes, there was physical abuse, verbal abuse from the parents. And I can't wait to get further along the show because I don't demonize. I see it through a different
Right.
perspective today. But
Yep.
and on top of that, my mom's dad, my grandfather, was sexually abusing me literally from when I was born. As
Oh
long as I
wow.
can remember, all the way up through the fifth grade. And and I can see what they were saying. They would say, your mannerisms and all the way down to your handwriting are just like your grandfather, and you're going to grow up to be just like him. Well, he's a raging alcoholic. He was a cop, worked for the U.S. Border Patrol, and supposed to be my hero. And this is a guy that would take me fishing without a fishing pole. We didn't have fishing poles in the car, and so when they would say this in their defense, they didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. But that confused me because I didn't want to grow up to be like this man.
Right.
And then also they were constantly bashing him, in the home, how bad he is, what a horrible person that he is. So when I would hear these things, um,
Mm,
you know, it was very confusing.
yeah.
Um, so, addiction, substance abuse disorder, when I had my very first drink at the age of 10 years old, I loved the taste of beer. My dad, I was mowing the yard. I had all these chores and my brother didn't. I basically grew up in my room. So I was not locked up. But I was told to go to my room. I stayed in my room all the time. I literally watched a tree grow, outside my window. Um, and you know, the the confusion came from all the things that they were saying. So in order to ease the pain and suffering, I found drugs and alcohol, provided me that temporary relief.
Right.
Um, and that's what addiction is that alcohol and drugs is just a symptom. What it really is there's unresolved underlying trauma, which it's a broad spectrum trauma. I mean, it
Hmm.
can be from a 17-year-old girl that's really in love with this boyfriend, and they're really tight, and then he breaks up with her to go out with someone else, right? And that could be major trauma for a person. And what we
Yeah.
do with our trauma, the world and the culture, has taught us that we can't talk about it. You know, and it's embarrassing. We don't think anybody feels this way, and so that's what I did. And around the house, I was funny. I was always trying to make people, my parents laugh and my brother laugh, and there was times that they would laugh, and so I would hold on to that moment, and so I would amp it up and even go more. And I was always trying to make people laugh, right? What I was doing, I realized today, seeing it through God's perspective, is that I was trying to ease my parents' pain and suffering
Hmm.
because they had their own pain and suffering that they were going through. And,
Yeah.
in life today, looking at through God's perspective, I had to look at how my grandfather was raised, and how my mom was raised, what the trauma that she went through.
Right.
Um, and my personalities and everything, my mannerisms are identical to my mom, so my mom was probably scared because when she saw me, and, I can't diagnose anybody as an alcoholic,
Right.
or a drug addict, but I saw the symptoms,
Yeah.
I could relate to the symptoms. And so I can only imagine, seeing her personalities and behaviors and mannerisms live on stage in front of her. It was probably pretty scary because she didn't want me to be like her, right?
Yeah. Right.
But she didn't have the tools on how to do that. She didn't have the tools, so it's probably very frustrating. And then it got to the point where I had enough, and I thought back, and became a difficult person to deal with. So
Hmm.
in summary, I had, and this is what's dangerous about it, I had real trauma. Okay,
Right.
and what
Right.
real trauma is that I was a victim. I mean, I didn't cause this. What happened to me with physical
Yeah.
abuse and sexual abuse is not okay. It's criminal. Um, but in order to make that pain and suffering go away, drugs and alcohol provided that. Anything visible to change my invisible problem, was my solution. And so I started creating self-inflicted trauma, on top of that. So it was a very vicious cycle. Um, and so I lived a double life. Everything was okay.
Hmm.
My
Yeah.
answer was, I'm fine. I'm great, and was known as positive, outgoing, charismatic. But deep down inside, it was dark, and I was dying. Multiple suicide attempts. We spoke yesterday on the phone,
Yeah.
real suicide attempts, not,
Right. Right.
not telling anybody, but having it planned. And then sometimes the suicide attempts were, um, you know, um, quick decisions,
Okay.
radical. I mean,
Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because there's basically two, what I've discovered in my own life and walking down that road is there's two avenues that are generally taken, either it's spontaneous or planned. And generally planners aren't spontaneous because there's um, meaning behind the date.
uh-huh.
But there are these moments I had on my own journey of like terrifying. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I made it through that.
Right.
And and that was the spontaneity of that. So what was that like for you, and how have those things started to change for you? And I don't want to detour you from your story too much. So if you're
No, no. And I love the word spontaneity. That's what I was looking for. And I lived my life, on spontaneity. It was, I was the
yeah,
king of, I would shoot before I would aim. I would empty the clip and then close my dominant eye and aim, right? and just recognize all the carnage that was around, and be angry about it. I mean, be angry at everybody else because, I missed my target. But the real problem was me. The spontaneity, because I wanted instant gratification. I wanted instant fix. As far as suicide attempts, I'm in it. I mean, I wanted to die. I wanted to leave this planet. And the thought of people will feel sorry for, no, I wanted to be gone.
Yeah. I know.
And so, I've had, at a very young age, at 5th grade, I swallowed a whole bottle of Valium in my mom's medicine cabinet. I was 45 pounds, and how I survived that. And then, ran my car into a telephone pole because I went over to high school girlfriend's house, and she had just broken up with me, and I wanted to stop by and just talk and see if we can. And she had another guy over there. And I was fine driving over there, and I was fine when I left. But when I turned the corner, I just went straight into rage. I mean, I would go from fear to rage like that, and didn't know why I was doing it. And ran my car into a telephone pole at a high speed, and went through the windshield, and woke up in the hospital out of a concussion. And I'm like, man, I'm still here. And then I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble by my parents, right?
Yeah.
Because you embarrassed us. This is embarrassing. And at the time in Plano, Texas, that was the time it was national news that the suicide rate was super high in Plano, Texas.
Oh, wow.
It was all over the news, and they didn't want to be a part of that. And so there's a lot of guilt and shame over that. And then, as it grew in my older years, numerous attempts where, my brother pulled a gun out of my mouth, in the car. I mean, the hammer was back, and thank God he showed up, and he still has that gun to this day that he has. So, and that's a lot of trauma on him. I created trauma with, I mean, that's, he used to tell me all the time, every day, I was just waiting for the call that it was the day that, I took my life. Yeah. And so, and needless to say, with my addiction, as it got worse, it was just suicide. It was a slow burn. I just didn't care if I died. I didn't want to live. But, growing up, at age 9, my dad said, go start a company, turn the cartoons off and said, go start a company. And I'm like, what? So all I knew was work, and I loved to work, and I loved to make money, and became, I was a very good golfer, growing up, and I grew up in the country clubs. I grew up in the men's locker room, very nice country clubs. And I grew up in the men's locker room surrounded by powerful men. And those are the men that raised me. They liked me. I had the gift of gab. I was a good golfer, and they taught me how to gamble. They taught me how to play cards. They taught me how to drink, and they were teaching me how to die, and so, I became one of the most well-known high-end luxury home builders in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and well-known across the country. And I built homes the air was real thin, $10 million homes, $15 million homes, for people, and was very successful at it. And I gave it all away. I didn't lose anything. I want everybody to hear that. I didn't lose anything. I gave it away. I gave it away.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of people say, because of drugs and alcohol, I lost everything. Right. I didn't lose anything. I gave it away.
So I call that squandering. I mean, I call that, there's the biblical story of the prodigal son there's a squandering of his life and ends up at the bottom, and, goes back to the father, just hoping to be a servant. Right. Is opened with welcome arms. So that's interesting. I love the way you put that. Because to me, I've squandered, and that squandering, there's language behind that says I've failed. So I love the way you put that. Thanks.
Thank you. In my home building career and all that, I used to speak, people would have me come speak about real estate. I would study the market. I would study the high end market. I would speak to large audiences, realtors, bankers, mortgage companies the trends. That's when social media was coming out, and I was very active in social media right off the jump, and was, educating realtors on how to do that. Little did I know what God was, preparing. And, you know, backing up a little bit, in 2002, I had a really bad week, and, I got the ultimatum from the wife at the time. I married my best friend from kindergarten. We grew up together.
Oh,
We did
wow.
everything together, but she didn't know all this stuff. It was an
Yeah.
act. And I was very close to her parents. Her parents weren't well received in the community. They were just different. But he was a very successful, wealthy business owner and sold his company in '87. For a lot of money. He was founder of a large commercial construction company,
Oh, wow.
and so civil engineer, and really, and him
Yep.
and I, we got along well. And in 2002, I got an ultimatum, to go get help. So I went to Betty Ford,
Okay.
out in Palm
Yep.
Springs, because at the
Yep.
time, had a lot of money and had great insurance. And I always tell everybody the reason why I don't say treatment and I say Betty Ford, because I want everybody to know I went to Betty Ford, because that's where important people like me go, right? I mean, that's what I thought of. I'm Betty Ford material.
Right.
And to this day, I learned a lot from it. And I'll never forget this. When I was standing in the hallway, the counselor stopped me, and he says, you will never. And I was a chronic relapser. I just couldn't stop. I would
Mm.
stop, and reload, stop, reload.
Yeah.
And so he says, you'll never get this right until you do the third step of 12-step recovery. And as he's saying this, the steps are hanging on the wall right behind him. And I looked at it. It said, made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I understand him. Right. And I'm like, that ain't happening. No, that ain't happening. I'm not going to turn my life over to Casper the Friendly Ghost. Right. I was an atheist, but I was, agnostic.
Right.
I just
Yep.
didn't want that label on me. And so, but I wasn't a believer. I wasn't walking with the Lord, as you will. And so, and I looked at that. Then he stopped me again, and he says, in our groups, you always talk about your children, and you just think they hung the moon. I said, yeah. I mean, that's my posse, And he says, if they were to cuss you out, spit in your face, and say horrible things to you and leave, how would that make you feel? I said, man, I'd be really upset and sad. And he says, and you don't see them for 30 years. You don't hear from them, see them, nothing for 30 years. I said, okay, what are you getting at? And he says, then one day the doorbell rings, and you open that door, and they're standing there. And he said, do you let them in? I said, absolutely. No questions asked. And he says, you just described your God of your understanding. Now that hit me. That was in 2002. And it took all the way to July 7th, 2017, after 27 mugshots, giving everything away, becoming homeless, living in a stolen Suburban behind the bait shop at the lake. I don't know why alcoholics always end up at the lake, but that's where we end up.
It's peaceful.
That it took me my 27th mugshot, and on July 7th, 2017, Christ came into my life.
Wow.
It was a Paul moment. It was he came into my life, and my life has never been the same since. As a result of that, and what led up to that salvation was when I got my 27th mugshot. I knew it was over. I was about to go to prison for a long time, and when you're arrested, they diagnose you, they categorize you. If you're a chomo, child molester, or misdemeanor, or different types, and then they have what's called aggravated assault category, which is the murderers, people who hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't that. And they made a mistake, and they categorized me, and they put me in the aggravated assault tank. Solitary confinement, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They made a mistake, but they didn't. And as I'm in there, I'm detoxing off of all these drugs and alcohol. This old man comes into my cell. I'm in a 2-man cell. It's a 4x9 room. And we're locked in that little room for, 20 hours of the day. And this old man came in there and doing life for murder. He's 75 years old, and they called him Ooh Wee. That was in prison. They gave you a name. Mine was Rabbit. They called me Rabbit because I couldn't sit still. I was pacing. I was about to crawl out of my skin. I was thinking about, what was going on out in the world. And he saw that, and he told me to sit down, and he says, "Hey, look out, Rabbit. You're doing hard time." I said, "They're going to chew you off the bone." Of course, I'm the minority. I'm white and proper.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So they think I'm either gay or a cop. Okay.
Right. Right.
And so there's eyes on me. I got jumped, one time when I was locked up. I got my tooth knocked out. Saw a guy get murdered in front of me, saw a guy jump off the second row and hang himself. I mean, a lot of stuff I saw I've never seen before. And this old man, said, "You're doing hard time and you need to get out of that world." I didn't ask any questions. I wanted to pretend like I knew it, but I didn't know what he was talking about. A couple of days later, a guy was being transported, and he just gave me a book. And it was a book called Detours by Dr. Tony Evans. He's a well-known pastor here in Dallas. And I just threw it on my bunk. And we asked, he says, "What's that book?" And I just said, "Well, it's Detours by Dr. Tony Evans. You want to read it?" And he says, "No," but he says, "I love me some Dr. Tony Evans." He said when he was a young man that when Dr. Tony Evans started the church, he used to drive around in his van or pickup truck and literally pick people up to bring them to the church. It was an A-frame building here in Dallas, very small. Man. As you know, now today it's a huge church, a huge membership, over 20,000 people. And so wow. He would be walking on the street, and he had polio, so he's always dragging his leg. And he was strung out on heroin. And Dr. Evans would pick him up and bring him to church, and he would do it because he would go and eat donuts and look at the girls, right? And he'll never forget that, what he did. And here we are with this book. And so he said, "Yeah, will you read it to me?" And I'm like, "Well, why?" And he says, "I can't read or write." Eventually, the whole tank, 45 men, none of them could read or write. None of them. All the tanks I've been in, these guys were smart, man. They were hustlers. And I mean, they knew what they were doing. But for some reason, this tank couldn't read or write. And so I just started reading it to him. I said, "Sure." And he would fall asleep. But as I was reading this book, it was a story of Joseph, of betrayal and abandonment. And we know the story. And if people are watching or listening to this, I challenge you to study the story of Joseph, because we can all relate. And as I'm reading this, it started making sense to me. I said, I can relate to this. What's cool is 4 days went by. And I wasn't anxious. I wasn't paranoid. I was at peace reading this to him. And I have very unique handwriting because my grandfather had perfect handwriting. And so I started journaling, and people go, "Man, I love your handwriting." And I was writing letters for the different inmates. And slowly but surely, this tank is coming closer and closer together. And I'm reading out of the book Detours, which led me into reading the Bible. Right. And so, on July 7th, 2017, I was in my top bunk and I couldn't breathe. I literally could not breathe, but it wasn't medical. It was something different. And I just exhaled. And I'm not a movie watcher. I am now. But I did see the movie Green Mile. You ever see it? And that moment where all the flies are, that's what it was like, all this anger and rage just coming out. And I breathed in, it was like ice water. And I felt so much love. And I'm looking around at the guards who are walking around. I love that person. I love that person. I looked down at Uwe. I said, I love him. I didn't know what was happening, but something happened. Something happened. And that's when Christ came into my life. And
you got a jailhouse exorcism.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, exactly what it was. And then then I was sentenced to another 2 years in prison. I was transported 300 miles away. I was put in another rock and roll tank, and it was a train. I mean, the tank I left had come together really close. The guards were just amazed, right? And the next tank I was transported to was the same one, rock and roll, And so I'm in there, and I'm just mind my own business and just reading. And I'm not this jailhouse preacher. I wasn't reading scripture or anything like that because
Right.
I was just learning. I didn't know what I was getting into. Um, and so as I was sitting there by myself, doing me, this inmate comes up and he says, "Hey, I like your handwriting. What's it say?" And I go, "Well, it says this, He goes, "Well, what are you reading?" And I told him I was reading. He goes, "Well, can you read some of it to me?" And I said, "Why?" He says, "I can't read or write." And so I looked at God and I said, "Wow, I see what you're doing, you know?" And, as I'm reading and, I didn't know how to pray or anything like that. And I just go back of the book, back of the Bible, Living Recovery Bible, and the New Living Translation. Thank God, God put something easy to read in front of me, the New Living Translation. And I went to back, like, how do I pray? It turned me to Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. And I'm
Yeah.
reading it. But here was another awakening is that, and I wasn't angry. I'd forgiven. It was just removed from me, right? And I read Matthew 6:14 and 15, and it changed my life, and it says, this is my translation, it says, when we forgive the ones who have hurt us, okay, the next verse 15 says, God's going to bless your game.
Right.
Once I forgave, okay, I invited God to perform the supernatural. And I kid you not, it was probably 2 or 3 days later on October 13th, 2017, they came over the intercom and said, "Michael Molthan, bunk and junk."
Wow.
And we were
3
all going
days
crazy.
after you got transferred?
No, 3 days after I read Matthew 6:14 and
Oh,
15.
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
And I understood it and I received it. And, God's speaking to me. This is why you feel the way you do. And he says, "I'm about to bless your game." Now, I'm not sitting in prison, like planning what I'm going to do because I still got time. I got 2 years left. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was accidentally set free. First time ever. And they had to literally, and even the guards knew it. They go, "This is not right. He's signed. I mean, he's en route to the Bradshaw unit." And they literally had to push me out of the prison. And that's the first time I looked at God and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And
Wow.
through thoughts and feelings, he told me to walk. So I made the journey 300 miles back to Dallas to turn myself in. And Judge Jennifer Bennett said, she saw the transformation. She's glad that I showed up. And she also heard through other inmates that came to her saying that this guy had changed their life. And she heard it was me. And she says, "I don't want to get in the way of that." And she set me free, and said, "Go pay it forward." And so I didn't know what that meant. So I'm homeless. I went to the Salvation Army and was sleeping on the floor. And then I thought I'd go check on my dad. He was sick. And I go to him and he says, "Hey, man, this guy keeps calling me. His name's the same as mine. He keeps calling my cell phone, looking for you." So I called him, and his name is Brian Glenn. And he had one of the most well-known business talk shows in the country. And he wanted to talk real estate and business. And he says, "We want to know where Michael Molthan's been, And I shared the story. So I was released on Friday, October 13th. 7 days later, the following Friday, I'm on this interview with him. And I tell him the story, and he says, "Wow, this makes sense. What year was this?" I said, "This was Friday." And so when this happened, the local media got a hold of it. iHeartRadio, there was a talk show there. They had me come in, and I walked to the studio. I didn't have anything. So I walked to iHeartRadio. I do this interview. Then they offer
Oh,
me a
man.
spot to do drive home traffic. And so I just started doing a talk show on self-improvement and recovery, and having guests on. And in fact,
What in the
in
world,
in
dude?
8 days, it'll be our 7-year anniversary from our very first show. And
Wow.
and and
Congratulations.
and here I am today.
That's
No, I
amazing.
didn't plan any of this.
That's amazing. So how do you, because there's this thing that I realized on this side of this kind of, well, I don't know what to call it. Maybe a recovery process, maybe a rewriting of my script, a new life, a new something. Um, I'm facing a lot of the old behaviors, but I'm on the other side of that fence. So, you're looking at things from a different perspective. How have you managed, especially with suicide? Because that is a default reaction. It sounded like it was a spontaneous default reaction for you. How have you managed to stay away from that? What's been the things? Because we all, we tend to go back and forth sometimes. Like the other day, I defaulted my reactions. Go take your life. I'm like, well, that's kind of stupid. Why is that my reaction? Why is this my default reaction? But that's, being on this side of it, I'm able to look at it differently.
Right.
It doesn't make those things necessarily less painful, even though those triggers aren't true. How have you managed to manage that?
Great question. Here's like, I love what I heard you say is that you crossed that line, and one of the things I'm really grateful for is that when those behaviors start coming up, for the first time in my life, I recognize it. I recognize it. And it all stems from fear.
Yeah.
Fear is false evidence appearing real. Not scared, but fear. And the solution to fear, I've learned, is real simple as we talk about it. So I
Yeah.
have a mentor in my life, a man that I've been working with for the last almost over 5 years, and I just pick up the phone and call him, and I'm in fear of stuff. Has the thought of suicide entered my mind in the last 7 years? It has. It has, because what I do is, it's a ministry. You know what I mean? And my old life. And when I really get in trouble, if I start comparing, because comparing is the death to contentment,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by comparing is, I'm like, looking at my old life, going, man, I could be retired today. I wouldn't, stuff like that. And I don't have the cash flow that I used to, um, and I start getting depressed. And 100% of the times when I'm depressed, 100% of the times it's because I'm thinking about me,
Hmm.
thinking about me. And so I hit that reset button and I chase that feeling of when I used to read to ooh-wee. Why did I feel calm and peace those 4 days? Why?
Right.
Because for the first time in my life, I was serving someone else, expecting nothing in return. It put me in the safest place in the world, and that's right here, right now, because that's where
Yeah.
God's at. That's the safest
Presence.
place in the world, the presence, right?
Yeah.
And so, I remind it, it's a fleeting thought, but in the past, it was a radical solution to really not even a problem,
Right.
you know. So that's how I handled that today. Um,
That's
and I
amazing.
talked.
So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And when I talk to people today, on the phone, I coach about 5 men in my coaching services, and
Okay.
if that comes up, um, it's temporary. I just simply say, "What are you grateful for today?" Just one thing you're grateful for,
Yeah.
and then I also tell them this, is that the world wouldn't be the same without you. It wouldn't be the same.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
God has a purpose for you, has a destiny for you, and so we have to get out of the way, um, and let God perform that.
That's a good point. That's a very,
Mm-hmm.
very good point. And that's what I was going to ask you earlier is there's this element where we show up every day. We just show up.
Mm-hmm.
We do what we know, we learn what we can, and then relax in the fact that, and let God do the unfolding of what we've just watered.
Right.
And that's what I've been learning. I got derailed here recently, and that's why this reaction was, well, just, you're not afraid, just go do your thing. And it's
Right.
like, okay, that's not really logical thinking. The logical thinking is, okay, there's a solution to the problem. I just don't
Yeah.
know it yet.
Yeah.
It's not a detrimental black and white yes or no. It's the same thing with reading. If you look at the in between, the ebb and flow, you'll find the answers to a problem that you weren't trained to tackle.
Right.
And that's where, my spirituality lies is if I can sit back and rest and watch the unfolding, I can stay in today. It's that simple, because I can plan for the future, but I have no idea how that's going to unfold. I know what
Well,
I want
yeah,
is
that's a
not.
good point. That's a real good
Yeah.
point, because it's like when people say, okay, we live in the moment, but I got to plan for the future.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But I can't plan alone.
Right. Yeah.
If I want to plan my finances for the future, if I do it by myself, I'm going to get in a lot of fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if I sit down with a financial advisor to plan
Yep.
for the future, guess what I get? Hope.
Yep.
Hope.
And
And so
success. Yeah.
you're right. And what happens is then my faith in God becomes even stronger. Right.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, you know, regarding what we're talking about, I do a little experiment with you. I guarantee you that every time you do your show and you have a guest on, all right, I'm going to ask you a question. In that 1 hour, or just right now, however long we've been on, have you once felt depressed?
No, never.
Have you once felt suicidal?
No.
Okay. Why? Because you're in the now.
Right.
You're
Yep.
completely out of self.
Yep.
That's why the show it's therapeutic for me. It's
Well, and I
very
also
therapeutic.
prepare for it. I
Yeah.
prepared mentally for it. So you mentioned the Lord's Prayer earlier. Well, my intention before every show is to meditate.
Uh-huh.
And whether that be, depending on where I'm at, a minimum of 5 minutes,
Right.
but anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. And that, today was that prayer, not my will, but yours, because it's not about me. It's about
Right.
whoever needs to hear this. And so let the conversation go the way it needs to go for that to
Right.
happen.
Right.
And that's what I love about it is it's not up to me. And I have this beautiful relationship with the Holy Spirit that when I'm too dumb to talk, man, she shows up. Mother
Yeah.
Wisdom is just like, man,
I
she
can
just
relate.
pours it on. And I'm like, you better pay attention because I don't know what the hell's coming. And,
Right.
and it's like, and people will be like, couldn't you write that? What did you say? I'm like, you should have been writing it down because I don't know. Like, I
Right.
don't know. But it's fascinating to step back and be a witness to something beautiful unfolding inside you, and to be not to be the one doing that, but allowing that to flow through you, and
Right.
being that channel for something beautiful to happen and blossom in the
Right.
midst of this ugliness that we
Right.
are.
It's
It's
beautiful. I
crazy.
can relate to what you said, before, I got on this with you. I always do this. I always say, God put the words in my mouth, speak through me to be a beacon of hope for the hopeless. You know,
Right.
my mission is to show the world who Christ is, not tell them,
Right.
not use Christ as a
Yes.
marketing tool. I always
Yes.
say when someone, when I meet someone and they say, hey, I just want you to know I'm a Christian. Okay, I'm like, you don't have to tell me that. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
Michael Jordan sitting down with you and I and saying, I just want y'all to know, I played in the NBA and I'm the greatest basketball player of all time. And we would look at each other like, why did he tell us that? He didn't tell us that. Right.
Right. Right.
I want to be able to sit down. I want to be I want people to feel and see it.
Yep.
And that's how I witness, to others is by action. Faith is measured by feet, not lips,
Mm.
and that's what I focus on today.
Can I ask you something in that? And this is kind of trippy, but do you feel like you fail in that sometimes?
In faith or
In,
in showing the world.
yeah, in representing that.
Um, yeah,
Are
I
you
mean, I
more
do.
consistent or?
I'm more consistent. My platform is I'm completely vulnerable and transparent. Okay. That's how I heal. Um, my best, whatever I do, I mean, is to, I talk about that, hey, I wasn't spirit, mind, and body today. I was
Right.
mind, body, no spirit. I recognize it. Okay. Um, but that's where the engagement, and that's what's attractive is to, you know, but here's what I learned from it. This is how I got through it. And I see it through God's perspective of why he's allowing this to happen. Right.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a really
And
good point. Yeah.
and that's where the opportunity to get closer to God is. It's not when everything's great. Okay.
Right.
It's always, I always say this, God will allow me to have all the control I want for everything to get completely out of control, to make me hit my knees, to turn to him, to realize I never had control in the first place. Right. And so I never forget that, because I'm like, God, can you lighten up on the pain? Can you lighten
Right.
up on the pain? And then I get in my head, I get scared. Like, he allows all this stuff to happen to me because he knows I'm going to talk about it. He knows I'm going to glorify him, and, God doesn't perform the supernatural just for fun. He performs the supernatural so his name can be known. That's it. That's why he does it, is so his name can be known. But to answer your question, yes, I stumble, fall. I've been known that I have very clean language. That all was removed from me while incarcerated.
Wow.
If I were, there's been times behind closed doors with my fiance that I've slipped. That's relapse behavior. That's old behaviors. And what I've
Yeah.
realized, that if I do that, I'm in fear. I'm crying out
See,
for
that's what
help.
I'm working on my language right now. And
Yeah.
people are like, well, it's not that big a deal. I'm like, but it is to me,
Yeah.
because it's my
I,
representation, like, to
right.
me and then to others. And that's what I want to, and it's really hard for me because I grew up with a trucker's mouth, still have it, still fumble with it every single day. But so there's these things that are these prayers that I'm like, why don't you just lift this mouth from me? I'm like, don't cut my tongue out. Just lift, this
Right.
language, because our language is very important in how we represent who we
Well, it's
are.
not lift the language. It's a symptom. God, please remove my fear. Remove my fear. I give you my fear. And then the language goes away, and I learned this. Everything I'm sharing, I've
That's
learned
interesting.
seeing
Yep.
it through God's perspective. When I was incarcerated, I'll never forget, I was saved and just doing me. I'm a very quiet person. I'm an introvert, blows people away. I'm a very private person. And, and so they were in the chow line. We were getting our food, right? Guys are cutting up, just doing them. And I'm sitting on my rack eating. And these two guys came in and said, "Hey, look out, Rabbit. Apologize for our language. We didn't mean to disrespect you." And I'm like, "What?" And so they left, and so I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, I didn't even notice it. I'm not cussing anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then as more and more I thought about it through God's perspective, okay, that's when it hit me, is to go show the world who Christ is, not tell them. I wasn't this jailhouse preacher. I was just doing me. People were
Yep.
coming to me. And so that's when I realized that we show the world who Christ is. So I was a witness to these men just by my action. And I'll
Well,
never
and that's the
forget
story.
that.
Yeah, that's the story of Christ right there. He didn't go
Right.
out and say, blah blah blah. It was
Right.
like, I just love you for who you are, and you don't have to
Right.
live this way. It's an invitation, is all
Right.
it
Well
ever has.
said. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it hit me. And then I looked more into that, more into the cussing, and I don't have anything against cussing. I don't. I mean, I don't judge, who am I to
Yeah.
judge? Um, and, but what's interesting is that when I was looking at it, I was like going, God removed this defective character from me. And then I realized that looking back, cussing, and I was trying to fit in, I was trying to be cool or be, all these different things. It gave me power. But at the end of the day, it was a result of unresolved fear, crying out for help, because cussing
Yeah.
would change the way I felt.
Yep.
Right. And so, backspace to what you're saying. Those are the things, when I start doing that, I recognize and I go, okay, something's off. And what it is I'm spiritually unfit. At that
Yeah.
moment, I'm spiritually unfit,
Yeah.
as opposed to pausing, getting my popcorn, and watching the movie that God has got right in front of me.
Right.
Yeah.
100%, man. That is 100% right there. We We worry about so much that we can't control. We do a lot that we can't control. Quit worrying about what you can't control. Watch the
Right.
beautiful unfolding. That's
Right.
the beautiful part about staying in today and watching the things happen. You know, as I
Hmm.
step back and I look at my frustration or my derail, my little bit of a derailment, I'm like, well, my sight is averted. That's it. I've just turned my head. It's not that, like, I've just taken my focus just a little bit off.
Right.
And although it took me days to get back there, I realized the value of staying centered once again. Like, it's not my first rodeo, but once again, now I know what it is to be 100%. So that is my drug now.
Right.
I'm looking for that and that connection. I find that through meditation and prayer and word and just positivity and my language for myself and how I present it to the world. And
Right.
it's an amazing process. And I'm still new at this. This is,
Hmm.
all this stuff is, I've been working and downloading all this information, this good information for 44 years. And it's finally starting to compute. The
Yeah.
puzzle pieces are starting to finally get put together.
Love that.
Um, how is your relationship with your family now?
Uh, I have forgiven them.
Okay.
I'm at peace, but there's no relationship. You know,
Okay.
they've gone their way, and I treat that as a boundary. I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
But if the phone rings, I'm answering. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
The phone rings. There's no resentment on my side. There's no anger,
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And I've forgiven my grandfather, and I've accepted the role that I played in that situation. And that confuses people. Like, wait a minute, you played a role in what he did to you? I sure
Yeah. Let's
did.
let's talk about that
I
a little
did. I
bit.
played a role in it, and the role that I played in it was I chose to hold on to the resentment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the role I
There you
played
go.
in it. And after Matthew 6:14-15, and when I truly forgave him, God performed the supernatural. I'll tell you a great story. I went to speak at an event, and it was this big high dollar treatment center, and I was kind of blocked. I was been on the road a bunch, and it was in Texas, so I drove to the event, and I pulled in, and it was one of the guys into self. I wasn't dreading it. I knew it was going to change once I got there, and I go in there and I go immediately to the bathroom because I had to use the bathroom. And as I go in the bathroom, there's two wall urinals, and then there's the stall where you shut the door. So I walk in there, and there's a guy at the wall urinal. There's one wall urinal open, available. And my whole life, I always locked the bathroom door behind me. Never showered in front of anybody. I never did slumber parties. This body dysmorphia, that I was struggling with,
Mm.
um, and it's a symptom of sexual abuse. And
Yeah.
there was a guy in the stall, with the door shut. So I waited for him to get out, to go in there, to go number one. All right. And shut the door and lock it. Habit. It's just what I do. And I recognized, I was like, man, am I ever going to, get over this? But I didn't know what I was going to speak about. So I told God to put the words in my mouth. And I literally walked in the room with all the people in there, and they had this big whiteboard, grease board. And I literally shared what I experienced in the bathroom that I've experienced my whole life. And I drew the bathroom, laid it all out,
Mm-hmm.
painted the picture. When I got finished, and I talked to him about forgiveness and all that, when I got finished, there's a man on the front row crying, and he hugged me and he says, "You saved my life. You changed my life because I didn't even think anybody else thought that way." And that's when I learned that that's a symptom of sexual abuse, just one little
Mm-hmm.
symptom, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm driving home, and it hit me as I'm processing, seeing it through God's perspective. I'm like, wow, as a result of forgiveness, God's using my grandfather and
Mm-hmm.
our story to help people, to help this person. I'm not on a campaign to, kill child molesters. I mean, is it wrong?
Right.
Absolutely, it's wrong.
Right.
But when we look at it from a different perspective, and so it really hit me. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. 2 weeks later, I'm getting thousands of emails, thousands from
Wow.
inmates all over the country, from jails and prisons all over the country. And come to find out that gentleman that was touched, his dad or family member is the CEO, president of Securus Technologies, which is government telecommunication, FBI, jails, prisons, White House, private communication, right? And so he saw the transformation in his son. And so he put Into the Rock podcast on every tablet and every prison and jail in the entire country. So the inmates will hear this show and they hear all this show, all as a result of forgiving my grandfather and sharing the story of hope and forgiveness to this one man. And look what
Man.
happened. And so, and so we don't know who we're dealing with. And that's the power of forgiveness.
Yeah.
See, if I had a resentment towards him and I was on a campaign and not talking about it and didn't have that, and if I didn't forgive him, God won't let that happen.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yep.
But as a result of that, look what happened.
Yep.
And now I look at this, my grandfather is saving lives. And so I looked at it through a different perspective. This is why God allowed it to happen. This is why he allowed it to happen.
Yeah. So as you say that, my grandfather's saving lives, our mind twists a little bit. It's like, how? But I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I experienced the same thing in a different way. I was on my way to tell my story on a podcast out in California, and I was actually coming back. Sorry. And I was standing in the Arizona desert. I'd been there for 3 days by myself. I'm camping in my car, walked naked 2 miles in the desert by myself. I mean, nobody around. I haven't seen anybody. I'm standing there looking out at the valley and the mountains all the way around me for 3 days. Beautiful sunsets, most of the beautiful I've ever seen, besides Michigan, maybe Indiana. And I'm standing out there, and for 3 days, I'm having to mark my trails because it's only chest high bush, but you get lost in 100 yards from campsite. You can't find anything. And on the last day, I can see everything. I see the forest through the trees. I see every marker that I had sight wise, everywhere I tracked and trailed. And in that moment, I realized I'm thankful for everything that's ever happened to me. I'm grateful that it made me the man that I am today. Not just because I could be something different, but because, number one, I know how to deal with me.
Right.
I know how to live with me. I know
Right.
how to deal with the guy that's trying to kill me every day.
Right.
Like, I know how to duck and weave, and sometimes he gets the best, sometimes I get the best. But now I'm on the other side of this, and, pull the rug. Try to pull the rug. There's no fear left, and you talked about that.
Yeah.
When the fear goes away, you're able to relax and watch life unfold in a beautiful way.
Right.
And
that's so beautifully said, and I heard this and I love it. He says, you're the greatest sailors in the world. Okay. They didn't become great sailing on smooth seas. You know it? That's not how they became great. And I can really relate to that. I can really relate to that. And, so my mission is that, what is addiction? What is the definition of addiction? It's the street name for spiritual stronghold is what it is. Okay. Addiction is simply this. It's a person, it's a place, thing, and here's the scary one, or a thought that has become my source.
Right.
Okay. It's leaning on resources instead of the source.
Yep.
Right. It's leaning on visible things to try to fix my invisible problems. So with that said, everyone's an addict. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the church world, the religious world, we are all sinners. I didn't understand that. I didn't want to hear that. You know what I mean? Because I just heard we were all bad. Okay.
Right. That's what most people hear.
Yeah. And so, so everyone is an addict. Thank God my consequences were so severe, for me to find God. Mm-hmm. And, there's a stigma and there's a label to addiction, because when we talk about addiction, we immediately think of the drug addict and alcoholic, right? And so we put the drug addicts and alcoholics over here, and they're just bad people. They're alcoholics and drug addicts. But the reason why our loved ones, the culture, the world, why we confuse them and frustrate them is because they're actually seeing their behaviors live on stage. right? And
Mm-hmm.
with that said, I've learned that if somebody is doing something that's bothering me, upsetting me, it's because I'm doing it or I did it. And so, but the culture, we put labels on. Oh, there's drug addicts and alcoholics. I don't want to look at myself. But needless to say, that same person who's pointing those fingers at the drug addict, alcoholic, they're addicts too, and they're seeking other visible things to ease their pain and
Right.
suffering. It
Right.
could be work, it could be power, it could be golf, sex, infidelity, all the stuff, gambling, anything,
Mm-hmm.
eating, service work. Service work.
Yeah.
There are people that get addicted to service work and they stay
Yeah.
busy, busy, busy because they don't want to sit down and look at themselves.
Mm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and I should, and what happens is what's beautiful is exactly what you're doing. The audience's head starts doing this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's called connection.
Yeah.
And what that is also hope.
Yeah.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
I understand now.
And their solution. That's the hope, is that
Mm-hmm.
we relate. Now there's somebody that's going through it, that is actually working through it,
Right.
that has tools that I might be able to use some of those.
Right.
We may not have all the tools, but we have some you can borrow.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing.
That's right. I just give away what was given to me. If I make it
Yeah.
up, we're all going to prison. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I just share, I just tell people about the great movie I just saw, and we get excited, go, oh my God, I'm gonna watch that. We'll even text our wife, say, hey, we're watching this tonight because, he said that this was great. I didn't ask what it cost. I didn't ask anything about it. It's just because I believe this guy, and it's a great movie.
Yeah. So how did you tell your story before? Was it more of a victim, when you were, when talked to people or somebody asked, or was that an open book for you back then? Or
No. Mm-mm.
okay,
No,
it's
I was trained as a kid. When we leave the house,
just a
everything's
show.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything's great.
Okay.
It's actually turned out to be a gift for what I do because Into the Rock, in our little world has gotten very large. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's a gift because I don't have that pressure on myself that I feel like I have to save everybody's life.
Right.
I don't have
Why
that
is
kind of
that?
power.
Okay. How
I've
did you come to that
learned,
realization?
I've learned watching other people try to do what I do. We're the longest active show on addiction recovery.
Mm-hmm.
People try to do it and they end up relapsing.
Mm-hmm.
They end up relapsing. They become spiritually unfit. It's hard.
Yep.
And so it's a lot of pressure. And I get really concerned when I see people, wanting to share their recovery story at a very early in their recovery. And I can't speak. I was that way.
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
didn't know what I was doing. And I was very aware of that. And I would share that on my show early 7 years ago, where I was at. And that helped me. And so, how have we, been alive, this long and doing it is staying in solution. I've set those boundaries in place that, back to what you're asking, is that, if someone messages, they have a direct response pointed to our website for resources and help. And I always tell them, if your recovery and your life depends on me, you're in a really bad place.
Right. Right.
I mean, you're in
Yeah.
a really bad place.
Yeah.
And, if I do talk to them and said, I know you are a guy, I don't want to talk about God. And I said, well, first of all, you called me. I ain't talking about God.
Right.
Okay. Because you do believe in God, because your God of your understanding is drugs and alcohol.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I try to help them shift the view. I joke around. I mean this jokingly. Okay. I want to help save everyone's life. I just don't want to hang out with you. No, it sounds horrible. I just love being home with
Well,
my fiance and being
yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
But it's I get a lot of great emails and stuff. Great stories.
Yeah. When, it's tough. That's one of the things I've learned recently is that it's not my weight to carry. I can walk beside it. I can encourage it. I can show hope to it. I can give love to it, but it's not mine at the end of the day to carry the
Yep.
decisions of somebody's, what they decide to do. They either will absorb that and apply it to their life, and when they're in their hard spot, they'll remember you and that voice that's whispering in their head, or they'll let it all go. And I can't control that.
Right.
I That's a tough one, because you're like, when you're empathetic, or you take on a lot of that stuff, and I'm learning to separate from that, but still feel and walk with that in a way.
Right. Right.
So
Well said. Well said.
yeah. So Michael, is there anything else you'd like tell me a little bit about your station, a little bit more? We're going to
Yeah.
plug
So
that, and then you have a charity as well that you
I have a nonprofit.
nonprofit.
My
Okay.
fiance created it. It's called M to the Rock Services,
Okay.
and what we do is we provide all sorts of resources for people who can't afford it.
Oh,
High level psychiatry, therapy, coaching, legal advice, financial advice,
wow.
health, fitness, treatment center. If you need inpatient treatment, I have vetted through that nasty industry. Of some, actually, I only have one. That I refer them to.
Hmm.
A good friend of mine who started it, and we can relate and work the same program. Tony Hoffman, PH Wellness out of California. He's a
Okay.
well known speaker. In fact, I'll hook you up with him. It'd be a great
Yeah,
guest.
please do.
He's a
Yeah.
well-known speaker across the country, and he lives in Dallas, and he's the real deal. So I endorse that and send them there, and send a couple of people there, and it's been great success. They're doing great. So we want to be able to provide services for people who can't afford it. So we
Right.
scholarship them. They're vetted. They're actually interviewed by me
Oh, okay.
because I want to make sure that they're willing, and they're willing to
Right.
do one thing, and they're willing to change one thing, and that's to change everything.
Right.
Right. In
Yeah.
early recovery, the world and the culture, and I applaud it. Okay. Is that it's spirit, mind, and body. That's the way God engineered us. And it gets out of order throughout the day for me, but I recognize it. That's great.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
when I'm functioning off spirit, mind, and body in that order, okay, my life is at peace. If it's out of order, there's chaos. All
Hmm.
right. So the world helping someone trying to get clean, just for this example, drugs and alcohol, they try to address the spiritual first. Well, the last thing we want to talk about is God. All
Right.
right. The way that I approach it is we address the body. We address the body, that's detox phase. We address the
Yep.
body, the mind, and guess what? The spiritual happens. And I
Right.
don't even have
So
to say anything.
what do you consider the mind? The brain? Or is
Mm-hmm.
that the okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, the world today has trained us to get educated, get smart, get educated, educated,
Right. Right.
educated,
Right.
right? It's not teaching us how to get spiritual,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so, when it's out here's a great example: alcohol, drugs fed my body, which affected my mind, and my exterior showed it, right? And you see people who have changed and have been reborn. It's like, man, this guy, what has happened to him? What's happened to her? She looks great.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to see. And what happens is when we feed our body the spirit, okay, the body and the mind heal, right? And it shows. We look
Hmm.
healthy, right? And so I focus on, and that comes in our prayer. God put the words in my mouth. I
Right.
want the spirit to feed my mind and
Right.
it to come out.
Yep.
And how do I know if I'm doing that? It's like after this interview, I won't remember a thing I said.
I know.
You ever do
I
that?
know. Oh, awesome.
And
That's
you're
what I was
helping
telling you.
someone, and you're
Oh,
helping
when
someone not commit
oh
suicide,
yeah.
and you're like,
Yeah.
and it was great and it was over with. And it's like, I don't have
It's
a
not
clue what I
me.
said. Right.
Not
It's not
me.
me.
Yeah.
But when I was feeding myself with drugs and alcohol, guess what? That wasn't me either.
Yeah.
That wasn't me talking. Because I'd wake up and go, God, I can't believe I said that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That wasn't me. I like this me.
Yeah. So I did, I threw a Hail Mary back in June to save my life. And I
Mm.
did a psilocybin therapy treatment.
But what?
I
Say that again.
was psilocybin therapy.
Hmm. What is that?
So magic mushrooms.
Oh, because
So
we were just, I was had a conversation about psychedelics yesterday with a
yeah,
psychiatrist.
yeah, they're amazing. And the results for addiction is outstanding as well.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to me in that was like I've tried everything to get away from this, and I couldn't. Like
And so was everybody else.
yeah,
Okay.
and this was I was just like I'm done. I can't live in this suicidal fight anymore. I'm done thinking this. I'm done feeling like this. I'm done having the pit in my stomach. Yeah, I've had joy. I know what it looks like, but living in 25% depression all the time, I can't do it anymore. And that's the improvement over 44 years of work is I'm still in 25% severe depression, suicidal thought.
Hmm.
The other 75% is, I'm doing pretty good, just like you, the outward experience. I'm great. What happened was, I faced these walls that I built around the trauma of my childhood.
Come on.
And as I built those from childhood, and those were built around fear, that's when temper tantrums started. And those temper tantrums never stopped throughout my adulthood. Those were just childhood behavior acted out in an adult sized 200-pound man that's dangerous now. So, but what happened was those lies that I told myself, well, this is the story. This is the reality. You couldn't argue with it. The story's true. The problem was the narration was victim. Now all those walls are broken down. It's like, oh, I'm not a victim anymore. I get to rebuild. I get to stop. I don't have to live in fear anymore. I don't know where I was going with that one. Like, I'm sorry.
No, no, keep going. This is good because I
It-
want to tag on to this. I can relate. We're
okay.
going.
Okay. So I guess now I'm facing myself from a different side. I'm looking at suicide. For 6 months now. I've been, I basically had a Native American exorcism, is what I
Wow.
would call it. Yeah, and it was amongst 18 other people, and just the sheer screaming of people's trauma sent me over the edge, and that was where it was like, Britton, it's not yours to carry. And I was like, oh, are you sure? Yeah, it's not yours. You don't have big enough shoulders. I'm like, oh my gosh, let it go. And so I had these really profound experiences. I had visions that came true that were 30 years old. I had just a plethora of things. And I've done more in the last 6 months of my life than I've done in 54 years. Like
Mm.
I had things on my bucket list that I never knew how I had on my bucket list,
Mm.
all because I'm not in control anymore. I'm not orchestrating the outcome anymore. I'm not
Mm.
pushing for something that I think is best for me anymore. I'm
That's
bound to
beautiful.
nothing. Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's God is the director.
Mm.
We're the actors. I'm
Yeah.
not the director of my own show. You
Yeah.
know, and I say that so beautifully, and it sounds great. Okay,
Right.
and I mean it right now.
Right.
But the day's not over.
Right.
Right? Remember, I
Yeah.
said God will allow me to have all the control I want to remind me that He's God.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what it took in my story. I'm not unique. My story is no different than anybody else. It just, for some
Right.
reason, it creates some engagement. Um, but, um, it took me to hit really rock bottom to realize that all the times the rock at the bottom was God. And guess what I did? I stayed at the bottom. I
Yeah.
stayed next to the rock.
Yeah.
And He sent men to help me to pull me out of the bottom. And you know who these men were? Murderers
Hmm.
that are still locked up. He sent them to point out, here I am, this very smart, educated, well-known home builder, successful businessman, very smart. Remember I said smart? Okay.
Right.
I was dumb as a bag of rocks because there was no spirituality.
Right. Right.
And what it took was for me to realize after that 27th mugshot, I realized that looking back on it through God's perspective, when I reflect back, because when I go in the past, I don't get depressed. When I go in the past, I learn from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized after that 27th mugshot, kicking off of opiates, alcohol, everything in my body on a wet concrete floor, all right, that God was all I had at that time because he was all I needed.
Hmm.
And he says, you will mind somebody. And
Yeah.
that's where I really, we're all chosen. Anybody who's watching this and listen, you are chosen.
That's
And
correct.
there's a plan for this. Is not what I designed my life to be, is to be doing this. Still
Right.
isn't. It still isn't. There's times where I wanted to quit and stop, and God just throws a bright light deal right in front of me. A phone call from someone saying, hey, I want to kill myself. I go, okay, you know, and and
Well,
so
thank you for that,
yeah,
because I've been struggling with it lately, and it's those days you wake up and you're like, and there's an email that says thank you. I'm
yeah,
like, what? I just want to quit today, but not
that's
now.
that's God.
That
Because
is
this
God.
is your passion. Okay. And what we do is that once we forgive ourselves, Britton, this is what I found. Once I truly forgave myself, okay, which took a long time to do, that's where the freedom came. And guess what? Now I look at it, my trauma is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
My trauma is a gift.
Yeah.
And so
And
it is,
yeah.
it's about just literally, I just share solutions that are working for me on things that used to baffle me.
Yeah. Yeah. I work with some people, and a lot of times we struggle with the very thing that is actually probably our biggest asset. Mine happens to be suicide. I understand the thought process. I understand what's behind it
Me
in
too.
various aspects, and you do too. You also understand alcoholism and the avenue and what that does, and like, but there's people with like OCD or anxiety, or I have a friend who struggles with. I want to be careful here. Just something, an affliction, and I'm like, this is probably your greatest asset because it's so much a part of you. It's just perspective on what that looks like to you.
Right. Right.
So what this other thing I discovered, and this is one of the most beautiful things that I found out about myself during this retreat and during that psilocybin therapy, was I discovered there was a 99% chance this wasn't going to work, and 99% chance I was taking my life within 2 days. That's where I was at mentally. I was like, it's a Hail Mary. I don't give a shit if it works or not. I'm just like, I'm probably dead in 2 days. Well, it works. Obviously, I'm still here. But what it did is it showed me the true nature of who I am and that true spirit of who I am. So that thing that I was before I was ever stripped of in this life, when I was a baby, when I was in the womb, when I entered into that spiritual journey into this world, whatever you call it, before anything was stripped from me, I found the boy that was born. And that is, it's a kind of a Peter Pan story. You discover
Mhm.
the boy. I've lost my marbles in the meantime, but now I've discovered how formidable I am as a man, and how wily and fun and charismatic I can be as all those things. And it really, and this is what I think is what if we can see what other people see in us, we'll see the true nature of who we are. Are,
Mm-hmm.
are you an angry person? No, I act out in rage. I act out in anger. I act out in frustration. I act out here, here, and here. But is that my true nature? Well, no, that's not actually who I want to be. That's all
Mm.
fear-based reaction.
That's
My
right.
true nature is this. So this true nature of Britain is I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm this, and this. All these good things. Well, that allows me to give myself grace, because even when I act out, I'm like, okay, that's not really who you want to be. So don't beat yourself up over it. Just let's learn now. We
Right.
have an opportunity to learn now. And that has been probably one of the most beautiful things that I found out about myself, as I finally saw what other people saw in me.
Right. Right. I totally get that. And that's very healthy.
Mhm.
And that is seeing it through God's perspective, not Britain's.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know what I mean? And that's
Yep.
where the gift is, and that's where the freedom comes. That's where the depression goes away. That's where the
Yep.
suicidal thoughts go away.
Yep.
It is, people, when I do talk to, I talk to men only, if a female does reach out, a friend and all that stuff, I let them know that my fiance is here on speakerphone.
Mm.
That's
Right.
just my boundary. And, but when I, talk to men that are dealing with major depression, like I used to, and, they say, okay, well, get up and exercise. And that's right.
Mm.
Your diet, go hang out with some friends and all that stuff. No, I can't get out of bed.
Right.
What I always challenge to do when I talk to them, it says, this is what I want you to do. I just want you to text two men. Just text two men saying, hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope you're having a good day. That's it. And expecting nothing in return, right? And just that simple action right there from the science part, okay, kicks the dopamine.
Mm.
It gets us in the conscious part of our brain instead of the subconscious part of our brain. Like I recently had interviewed, that's how we met, was Dr. Rob Kelly, who I've
Mm-hmm.
done extensive work with. And he is one of the best. I mean, he's
Fantastic.
outstanding. And, he tells a story about, he walks by and tells someone, hey, nice sneakers.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's that moment, it reminds me, it's that moment when I was reading to the inmates. Okay. It gets me out of self. And just that one thing that stimulates some dopamine. And then the next step is just get up and make your bed. Tony Hoffman, he says that, and it's accurate. Not, and when I was incarcerated, when I finally detoxed and I knew I wasn't going anywhere, I'll never forget. I just made my bed in my bunk.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to get my little area neat, and I
Yep.
felt better. I mean, self-esteem was growing, and then slowly but slowly, I started moving around, and the depression goes away. Um,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
that's a lot of advice, for mental health and what we talk about with mental health and all that. Um, we have to remember there's true mental health where doctors need to be involved. Okay. But no
Right.
matter what, medication will not help me if I'm not working on my spiritual growth, or in the
Yep.
recovery world, working a program of recovery. Because what happens is the medication becomes my source,
Right. Right. Yep.
right? And then I'm out of there.
Yep. That's the other beautiful thing. I'm not on any meds. No
Mm,
meds anymore.
that's
No
awesome.
depression meds, nothing. It's, yeah. I mean, I went to fight for my life. I didn't leave anything on the table. I don't know if it's the Irish blood in me or what, but I was like, fine, you want to go to war? Let's go to war and let's do it. And
I can relate.
I got my butt kicked, and it was the best fight I was ever in. And the, I mean, I'm giggling like a little kid, just like this was just, I loved getting beat up by the Lord and
Mm,
shown who I really was. Because like, you're
mm,
not what you think you are.
mm.
I'm like, oh, wow, I guess I'm not,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
And
my mentor, his name is Ray Wiley Hubbard. Yeah, you may have heard of him, famous singer songwriter, um, and his mentor was Stevie Ray Vaughan before, and he just passed. He's just a wealth of knowledge,
yeah,
and so just I talked to him this morning, and I talked to him probably 2 or 3 times a day, and he's just got the funniest sayings. He just goes, Michael, just remember this: people don't wake up in the morning thinking about you. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
I get in my
that's
head,
awesome.
and it's like
Right.
people don't wake up in the morning thinking about you. Okay, he says you have a hula hoop around you. Just focus on what's inside your hula hoop, and it's just
Right.
boom. I just feel better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, it's
and
all
it's
the
so
little
true.
tools.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just those little tools. Is life simple? It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. If I'm operating spirit, mind, and body, I'm Gucci.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
But when that's out of order, and listen, I want everybody here, it gets out of order every single day, throughout the day.
Yeah.
Throughout the day, it gets out of order. All right. Um, but I recognize it and I reset. Um, we talk about prayer. My prayer is in the morning. I don't have a standard prayer. Anybody's watching to listen to this, I don't know how to pray. Just have a conversation. Just
Yep.
start out by just saying, whoever you're God, God, keep me sober today. Amen. That's it. That's a real prayer. Prayer is not a ritual; it's a relationship.
Right.
And
I love that. Thank you.
one of the prayers that I say is that, God, I don't know what to pray today, but here's what I do know. You know exactly what's going to happen in my life today. It's almost like a question: why do I pray if He knows what's going to happen today in my life, right? And I say, you know what's going to happen in my life today. Please help me accept it and see it through your perspective, not mine,
Yeah.
so I can share the experience on Britain's show. So I can
Yeah.
share the experience with someone else of how you're performing the supernatural in my life. You know,
That's
you know,
awesome.
and so and that's it's just a prayer. I like to write. I write quotes. I'm almost finished with a daily devotional book that I'm writing, and it's called
Oh,
Today I
nice.
Realize. And everything starts out, hey, check this out, family. Today I realize, that that um that us men, fathers, we should never underestimate our role as a father, husband, or a leader, because the people who are watching, especially our family and our children, never underestimate your role as a father, because our children's view of Christ largely depends on their view of us,
Ouch.
right?
Ouch. That'll get you on it.
Yeah.
Make you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's these are the things that God feeds me, that I love alone time. I love being alone. I told
Yeah.
you I'm very private, but I have to be careful. There's a difference between isolating and being
Yes.
alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Isolating can get all the way down to the efforts, you know, uh, you know, and you know what? I don't know if you can relate to this. Sometimes when I get depressed and angry, I know I'm doing it, but I'll stay there because it just feels good. Do you know what
I
I
did
mean?
this the other day. I
Yeah.
literally did the same thing. I was like, God, I don't want to talk to you today. I'm pissed off and I just want to be left alone. I like it here. I'm comfortable. And it was like all day I didn't hear a thing. I'm
And
like, is my brain silent? I was like,
that's a real prayer.
yeah.
You know what I
And I
mean?
was like,
That's a real prayer.
but it was respect. What it was surprising to me is, I'm usually replaying tapes when I'm in that mentality of depression. And things are keeping me there
Hmm.
intentionally. Like that tape is just, and all it was frustration. I wasn't replaying a tape. I heard the voice wasn't going off. Like all it said was, you can stay here as long as you want, but eventually we'll have to deal with it. And that lasted about 10 minutes after I heard that. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, this isn't really any fun anymore. So let's deal with it. And then I started looking at it different.
Yeah, there you go. You start looking at it through
Yeah.
his perspective.
Yep.
And then what
Yep.
happens when we do that?
Well, then you have a smile on your face because you start to understand how how much you really don't have control. And spirituality is a real valuable. It's your pot of gold
Hmm.
for a lot of people. For me, it happens. I feel fortunate enough to have ventured down these many different roads spiritually and ended up where I love
Right.
and what I understand and what resonates in my soul and my
One
body.
thing is that, I hear God through people.
Mm.
I hear God through people. Um, and I learn more about God listening through people who are not believers.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
God uses everyone to do his work, even Satan. Remember, hey, listen, God every day taps Satan on the shoulder and just says, hey, I just want to remind you, I made you,
Right.
right? I can take you out. But he needs Satan for his name to be known, right? Okay. And so He can't outplay God.
Why do you say that? Because there's going to be some questions on that. I know the answer, but why do you say that?
Well, I mean, it's written in the Bible. Everything has to go through God. God approves everything before Satan can do it, right? And he allows these things to happen to give us the opportunity to turn to him, And we eventually will when the pain gets bad enough, right? And that's what I mean by that. If there was no Satan and everything was rainbows and bunnies, okay, I wouldn't be talking to God. It goes back to what I
Right.
said. It goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, it's great to believe in God when everything's great, right?
Yeah.
But in the book of James, it says, consider it pure joy when things are falling apart. What? Yeah, and I do that today.
Yeah.
I do. I can honestly say that when things are unraveling, it's painful. I'm upset. I get there, but I there's that voice in my head saying something big's about to happen. You know, something big. He's training us for the next stage of our life to
Yeah.
pursue his destiny.
And this touches on the greatest obstacle, but learning phase of my life is that, where was I going with that? It's a faith-based issue. I forgot where I was going with that, Michael. Sorry. I'm
It's
all
all right.
lost in thought and prayer and
That's all
just
right.
going through the whole scenario. I love talking about this stuff.
Well, you
So,
mentioned the word faith, okay,
right. Yeah.
and so when I work with people and talk to people, we don't talk about God or anything like that.
Right.
And I go, can you go the rest of your life without drinking alcohol or doing drugs? Like, man, oof, I don't know. I said, okay, I can relate to that. Can you go the next 3 minutes without using or drinking? Yeah, no problem. They immediately, I mean, it's like before I could get it out of my
Mm-hmm.
mouth, it's like, no problem. I said, that's faith. That's
Yep.
faith right there in something invisible.
Yep.
And it kind of plants that seed, right? So I have to sometimes really dumb it down to the ridiculous to get me back on track,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes uh, let's pretend God knows what he's doing, right? See, when I'm worrying, tripping, okay, what I'm really doing is I'm telling God he doesn't know what he's doing,
Exactly. Yep.
right? I'm telling him he doesn't know what
Yep.
he's doing. And it's all
Yep.
the result of fear. I want to land this with something I want to share with you because we were talking about fear, right?
Okay. Yep.
So fear, and I speak on this, fear is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for my faith to
Yes.
grow,
Yes.
okay? Or to go back to the penitentiary,
That's where I
right?
was going with this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I get into the feeling of fear, if I don't do anything with that, right, it turns into a resentment. All
Mm-hmm.
right. If I don't do anything with the feeling of resentment, it turns into anger. Then it turns into rage. Then it turns into isolation. And then it turns into paranoia. And the story that I have made up in my head of what's happening, all right, is in
Right.
my own voice,
Right.
the paranoia. And then I relapse, go back out, just do spontaneous decisions, right? I start doing radical solutions for a simple problem. I mean, my whole life, if I got a splinter in my pinky toe, okay, I would cut my leg off to get rid of the splinter, right? Instead of just getting tweezers and pulling the splinter
All
out.
right. All right.
It's just like radical. And so um, with that said, it's a great example, you know, text my fiance, right? And here I am, recovery Jesus, on my way to go speak. All right. I text my fiance, I love you. All right. I didn't ask her a question. I texted her, I love you. She didn't respond back. All right. So now I've got a resentment. Okay. And what that looks like today, it's internal. I've got a resentment. And then I look again and she still hasn't responded back. So now it turns into anger. Start feeling something in here. Okay. Then it turns into rage. I might start gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. like that. And then it turns into isolation where I'm like going, okay, we going to do this? I said, if you call me or text me, I'm not texting or calling you back. So I'm going to punish, right? Okay. And then if I don't do anything with that feeling, it turns into paranoia. And then what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like, and remember, I just sent a text, I love you. All right. And if I don't do anything, it turns into paranoia. Oh my gosh, she's leaving me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm being abandoned.
Yeah.
You know, a big trauma of mine. She's going to go be with someone else. My clothes are in the driveway, and here I am in this paranoia. And I just texted
Right.
her, I love you. So I start putting needles in my arm and start drinking again. Okay. And I get arrested, locked up. And, I call her and say I'm locked up. And she's like, what is going on? What happened? And I said, well, I texted you, I love you. And you didn't respond back. And she goes, oh, babe, I'm so sorry. I saw that, but I lost my phone. I couldn't find my phone. I've been looking for it all day. I'm like, but I have this whole story in my head, right? It's just like crazy. So the solution is, what is the solution to fear? Is we talk about it, So I call Ray saying, and he would respond this way. So, well, Michael, uh, you didn't even ask her a question. She didn't have to respond,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
But the real results, so we get deeper, our whole life, we water the leaves on the tree,
Yep.
and then we complain that the tree's dying,
Mm-hmm.
right? We never get to the root. We have to
Right.
water the roots. And the real root is that I had some unresolved fear that I hadn't talked about. And so we talk through it. It's that simple. That's how we remove fear. And as a result of picking the phone up and calling someone and talking about it, guess what happens? My faith grows.
Right. Yep. There's something about releasing the pressure just enough to be able to think through the process.
It's hard for
And
men. It's hard
it's
for
really
men.
hard. Yep.
It's hard for men because, we have that shield that we put up. But, for women watching this and especially like single women or a single man
Mm-hmm.
watching this, okay? If you want to be attractive, what's attractive to a woman is a man who's vulnerable and transparent. Okay. And for the women, if your man is vulnerable and transparent, okay, and you get in an argument 2 months later and you throw that back in his face, he shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
He shuts down.
Yep.
And so it's this
Yep.
chemistry in the bond. But that is the most attractive thing to the human race is vulnerability, your true authentic self, and transparency.
Yeah. I agree.
And I
I agree.
applaud you for that. You do the same thing. I watched a couple of your stuff last night, and
Oh,
I was
thanks.
super stoked for this. You're the real deal.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I've
You're helping a
stumbled
lot
along the
of
way, but
people. You're helping a lot of people. This world would be a totally different place without Britain.
yeah.
Do you believe
Yeah.
that?
Those are tough still.
Yeah.
Compliments are very, very difficult. And I haven't really dug into that, but I just try to say thank you still and
Say
move
thank you.
past. But
Yeah, say thank you and receive that. And, a guy
yeah,
taught me, he says, instead of beating ourselves up with the baseball bat, try a feather.
right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's this, we're going to get off here in a second, but I want to leave you with this, if that's all right. There's this epiphany I had not long ago. I was in heavy meditation and prayer and just kind of struggling. This is where I was going with this earlier. There's something about the suffering that is worth its weight in gold if we lean into it and embrace it and learn from it. So, and that goes back to biblical readings of Christ and how he walked, and there's purpose in walking in the dirt and waiting for your food and to see who will give it to you in the next town, and this element of financial brokenness that creates an incredible amount of faith, because if you haven't been able to build it, then you have to pray your way through it, per se.
Yeah.
So I learned that valuable lesson in that brokenness, that there's something about that. But through that, I was going through this. I was like, I was in kind of a tussle verbally with a friend, and I'm like, well, what does forgiveness look like? And so I started looking at it from God's perspective. I'm like, well, what he's asking. So I started looking at like the Lord's Prayer. I'm like, he's asking me to forgive somebody. What does that look like? Well, forgiveness is forgiving the thing that just happened. Okay, well, that doesn't seem like enough. I'm like, so what's the rest? Well, grace. What do you mean grace? Well, give them grace to be who they are right now for everything. So I'm looking through this and I'm like, okay, so I can forgive and I can allow grace. And then and then the Lord's like, then you got to ask for forgiveness. I was like, what do you mean? Not from me, from them, for your part. So, oh my gosh, okay. So, and then you got to give yourself grace. I'm like, what? For being who you are. And then ask me for forgiveness and allow me to show you grace for everything that is. I'm like, wow, that's a whole different perspective of forgiveness and grace for Britain. I
Right.
was like, wow, that's, that helps me. There's a trinity of that grace and forgiveness. And I don't think I could have forgiveness without that grace of allowing somebody to be who they are right now. I'm not changing. I don't get to change that just because
Right.
I forgive them.
Right. I like that, and it reminds, I speak on forgiveness a lot, how to forgive and all that. And for me, my personal experience is the sooner that I accept the role that I played in the situation,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
the forgiveness is already in motion.
Yeah.
Some things we don't forget, but we don't have resentment towards it. And then once I accept the role I play in it, and then I look at their life, I look at what they've gone through, and I look at it through a different perspective. There's a lot of freedom there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of freedom there.
Yeah.
It's we love receiving forgiveness, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
asking for forgiveness, what we're asking for is forgiveness. Okay, if they don't forgive us, that's on them,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's on them. There are some situations where we can't ask for that forgiveness, whatever the situation is. Like, if someone is, you know, having an affair with their best friend's wife and all that stuff, and later on they, go in and say, "Hey, I just want you to, will you forgive me? I've been having an affair with your wife," and he didn't know anything about it.
No.
I mean, that would harm
No.
someone, right?
Right.
But
Right.
that's where a mentor comes in, where you
Yes.
literally write a letter to that person, read it to your mentor, and then shred it. There's
Yeah.
situations like that. But, as soon as we accept the role we play in it, is where we find the true freedom for me. And that's where the forgiveness comes in. And then we are giving God permission to show us grace,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
that's, that's when he shows the grace, is when
Yes.
we do that. He says,
Hmm.
now I got you. I got you. And I challenge everyone that the first person that we need to forgive is ourselves.
Right. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And then understanding that I'm not perfect. Still, just because I feel better and I'm doing better and I'm working towards something better, I'm not perfect. I still struggle with these certain things. That's the
But you
beauty of
recognize
this.
it. But you
Yes.
recognize it. Right.
Yes. That is the beauty of it.
Before we didn't recognize it, right?
Yeah. Now I get
So
something to navigate that's very, very beautiful. That was stuck in my life that no longer gets to stick.
that's
It
right.
doesn't get to stick because I recognize it. Now I get to learn how to navigate through that, around it, or learn how to catch it before it takes a hold again.
Right.
It's a whole different process, a whole different mentality
Yeah.
on this side of it. Like
Well, what
you're,
you're doing is you're serving others with your platform. You're out of self. I'm willing to bet that if you're like me, um, this is not about notoriety, the numbers, and
no,
all that stuff. Mm-mm. It's therapy for me.
yeah,
It's therapy for me. It gives me an hour where I'm completely out of self.
yeah. So there's this thing I started doing when I got all this podcast equipment. I started doing these therapy sessions where I would do this with myself because I'm angry and I'm upset and I didn't know, like, I can't see myself. So I started seeing myself, and then I'd go back and watch it, and then I'd do a revised, well, this is more of an appropriate response to this problem. And that really started unwinding the tapes for me. It's like I'm aggressive. I'm like, that's an ugly Briton. And
So you're
and then
doing
I would
video
go back
journal.
and yeah, to
That's
see who
beautiful.
I really, really am, to kind of see what other people see.
Hmm.
and it's helped me a ton. It really has. So I tried the
You
other
know what
night
I
and I
see?
just
Do
started.
you know what I see?
What's that?
This is what I see and feel. I see a very brave man. That's what I see. What I feel is a very pure man. Okay. There's no hustle. And I also feel this: you don't want anything, and neither do I.
Yeah.
Right?
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
You have
You're
no
welcome.
idea.
Yeah, receive that
Oh, thank you.
because I mean that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
When you're, go
let's
ahead.
make a covenant, okay? If you get in a dark place and you get in your head, call me.
I will.
All right.
Vice versa, man.
Absolutely.
I love this stuff. It's
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, let's go ahead and close this out, man. Michael, thank you so much for being on the Suicide Monk. This has been unbelievable for me. Like
Oh, good.
just with the connection and how this all came about, and with Rob and his interview. Like it's just been a snowball of beautiful in my life of doing this and being able to share this experience, being on this side of it, being able to have these conversations and really feed my own life so that we can feed others, and putting this information out there that's so
Absolutely.
valuable. It's so beautiful. I couldn't have orchestrated this. I couldn't have orchestrated any of the things that are going forward from the start of this to now. This is so. Thank you,
I
man.
can
I
relate.
appreciate you being
Well,
here.
I want to thank you and all that you do, and it's an honor, and I always say, I get to do this today.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I
Yes.
get to do this
Yes.
today, and I'm grateful for that, and grateful for you, and look forward to having you on my show.
Man, I'd love that. Thank you. I know I didn't expect that. I
Absolutely.
appreciate that. That would be
Absolutely.
fantastic. Well, thanks for being on the Suicide Monk, buddy. I really do appreciate this.